Hi everyone and welcome to Beyond an Ordinary Life. Thank you for joining today. I am your host Christina Gerdes and I have been living abroad for more than 5 years in countries like the USA, Mexico, Malaysia and Denmark. By stepping out of my comfort zone, I was able to become more culturally aware, develop new language skills, make international friends and travel to beautiful places around the world. So, you always wanted to go abroad and experience new cultures as well? Then this podcast is here to help you reduce the barriers of going abroad. My guests and I talk about why you should go abroad, what options you have, what potential challenges might arise, and how you can overcome them. Let's get started. Hello.
Goddag.
Ahoy. Moi. Ciao.
Namaste.
Ni hao.
Today I'm speaking to Livia. Livia is a girl that I know from Denmark and she's studying in Denmark. But she's not Danish, she's actually Italian. And today I'm gonna be interviewing her on her experience abroad and why she's chosen Denmark and what she can recommend you if you also decide to wanting to go abroad. So Livia, please start and introduce yourself.
Hi, thanks for having me. As you said, my name is Livia. I'm born and raised in Italy, and I'm currently 25, turning 26 this year. I've been in Denmark since 2018. I've just completed my bachelor studies at the University of Southern Denmark in Odense, and I'm actually 24 hours away from moving to Copenhagen to study my master's.
I'm so jealous, honestly. Copenhagen is a great city to live in. But Odense isn't too bad either. So could you tell me on what you studied in Odense?
Yes, my bachelor is called Market and Management Anthropology, and it's a rather odd mix of business, as the name entails, but with the anthropological twists. So it tries to answer, among many other questions, the question, why do people choose and behave economically the way they do?
Super interesting, and maybe it's also interesting for our listeners to mention that that's actually how we met, because I was helping you with your thesis, and
that's true.
That's how we met in the first place. So when you are abroad, there's all kinds of occasions how you can meet. So I actually was an interviewee for her thesis, and that's how we met and talked about
you were gracious enough to sit on one of my interviews, and you gave me some really great material, so thank you.
You're welcome, no worries, and thank you for joining our podcast here today. So thanks for the introduction, and maybe you could go now into why or tell me a bit about your experience abroad and why you've been abroad and where you've been.
Absolutely. So I started traveling abroad when I was very young. The first time I can remember was when I was 11, and I went to an international camp in Finland, actually, on my own. And I tend to tell the story about Finland because it was definitely the moment where I realized I had to learn English, because I left Italy with maybe 15 words in total of English in my mouth. And once there, I realized that as Italians, there were 4 of us, and the French students were the only ones who had no capability of speaking English at 11. So it was a very humbling experience. But I also believe it was my trial of fire. After that, I always felt I had some kind of self-assurance when it was time to go abroad afterwards, that I could do it in some sense.
Because you did it there without even knowing English.
Exactly. It couldn't be worse than that.
So if you can do it, you can do anything.
Exactly. Exactly. So after that, I spent quite a few summers going to different language camps. I'm not quite sure what they would be defined as in English, but for instance, me and my brother went to a school in Malta for 2 or 3 weeks to obviously better our English and also to visit Malta, and it was fantastic. And I think the year after we went to Spain, and then my brother also went to Ireland. All of this was organized through an agency that was working with my dad's job. So it was always with a group of connationals of other Italians, but the destinations that you could choose from were many. And I definitely think those experiences, although they were maybe more sheltered than just going abroad on your own, they definitely taught me a thing or two about being independent and being on your own. Later, when I was 16, I was an exchange student in Argentina. So I left Italy right around the time when I turned 16, and I lived in a place called Formosa for 11 months. And then I came back to take what would be my last year of high school. So I graduated from there at 18, and my, I guess, interrail or graduation journey was actually flying to Canary Islands, where I worked for a few months at a spa as a spa receptionist in Lanzarote Island. Beautiful place, by the way. After that, I came back to Italy. I studied for a couple of years to get what would be, I think, a top-up degree in tourism hospitality. Worked in international hotels in Italy, and finally around 2017, I would say, I started working on the idea of going back to university, and I started looking in options abroad, and that's how I got here.
So that's how you ended up in Denmark. Super interesting story. I want to go a bit more detailed into why you ended up, going into this language schools, because you said there was this connection between the agencies and your family. So could you tell me a bit about who empowered you, or what empowered you to actually end up doing this, and what kind of value it brought to your life?
Absolutely. So I can't recall at the moment the name of the agency, but I'm pretty sure it's nation specific. It was because my dad was a high school teacher, and so there was this sort of community for the children of teachers and professors to get into this kind of international camps. And definitely from age 11 to 16, when I went to Argentina, it wasn't exactly entirely my choice to go to these summer camps. It was definitely my parents who thought it would be great to improve both mine and my brother's language skills. But I felt over time it became more of a thing that I wanted to do, and that maybe my brother fell out of love with quite a bit faster. So definitely by the time I was 16, it was entirely my decision to go to Argentina, and I actually faced some pushback for it.
Could you elaborate on that pushback?
Sure. So by the time, I would say that at least in my family, we had the understanding that I was the one that was traveling, or at least I was the one that would be abroad in some respect. But actually, quite interestingly, in the same year that I was in Argentina, my brother traveled to Shanghai for a year with his university. Basically, we were on the opposite side of the planet at the same time. So for my parents, I think they definitely saw it as a chance for both of us to grow, and for my brother to get better work opportunities, and for me to kind of possibly, hopefully, I think, grow out of my teenage years. But outside of the immediate family, there was quite a lot of pushback, not actively, obviously, but a lot of comments such as to my mother, a lot of people asked, how could you let her go? Aren't you worried? And especially while I was in Argentina, people demonstrated a certain level of concern with my well-being while I was there. Mm-hmm. And to me personally, people my age and slightly older would ask questions like, oh, how are you going to deal, or what are you gonna do with your boyfriend, as I left Italy, that I was still with someone, with the subtext of how can you leave your boyfriend? Mm-hmm. And even at the time, it sounded odd to me that was the concern for a 16-year-old going on an experience that is definitely once in a lifetime. So what did I do with the boyfriend? We broke up a month in, as you do.
Yeah, I can relate.
Exactly. Long distance is hard. But
it can work as well, I have to mention. I know a lot of people who made it work, so it's also about
me too, and I'm jealous. I never seem to get their secret. But so
anyone who's listening who knows the secret, please tell us and DM me.
We wish to know. So yeah, most of the pushback was just realizing how far from people's understanding of what a 16-year-old is quote unquote supposed to be doing. The idea of going abroad was, and at the same time they understood it as something that was a great experience. Now I don't know if our German-speaking listeners or English-speaking listeners had the same experience, but in Italian, when you say a great experience, it can mean literally anything. You know, a journey abroad, starting a new job. It's kind of a free-for-all of when people don't know how to define something, or like a moment or a stage in your life. Then that's what they say, and it's something that I then learned to cope with after that experience in Argentina. It was the definition that was given to a lot of my stays abroad and a lot of my decisions in life. So if there's someone out there who grew up in Italy, they know what I'm talking about.
Interesting. And I think that's a very important aspect that you're mentioning here also, that even peers or other people, or, you know, whether it's not only, you know, the direct family, even people outside of your family could be questioning your, whatever you're doing.
Your
because
sanity.
They're not, exactly. Because they're simply not used to it. They haven't heard it before, or, you know, they don't know anything about it. So they're way more critical than they should be. So that's very normal, and that happened to me too. I remember the first time I went abroad, I told my family, hey, I'm applying, and they were like, yeah, sure. And I've been talking for it for like years that I wanted to do it. And the day that I got the acceptance for an interview, my dad was like, wait, what? You're going there? You know? And I'm like, I've been talking about this for a year, so why are you even surprised? But, you know, because people don't take it, first of all, serious that you do it. And if you end up doing it, they like criticize it. But there's also, like, dependent on your surroundings, there could be also a lot of people who, you know, empower you to do it and, you know, who like it. But there's always two sides to it. So thanks for mentioning that. That's a very good point. So basically, the next question would be like, why did you decide to go abroad? And you already partly, like, you know, mentioned that in terms of first your family pushing you into that direction, and then you realizing that you, you know, had this kind of inspiration before and wanted to do it again. Is there anything else you would, you know, like to mention on the why?
I would mention, and I think it's important to mention that, at least in my case, the decision of going to Argentina was definitely informed, or at least in part, by a desire to, quote unquote, get out of my hometown and my home in particular. As I mentioned, it was definitely my rebellious teenage years, and I felt like I wanted more and more independence and freedom. And despite both of my parents being very open and forward thinking, it was just not up to a level that I was comfortable with. So to some extent, I sometimes think of my experience in Argentina as me running away with the circus, just because I believe it just marked a point in my development as a person where for a year I was my parents' child, but they could not protect me or control me or ask me basically anything about what I was doing.
I mean, they could potentially.
Exactly, but
they wouldn't know for sure.
Precisely, and also with a 7 hours time difference, they would know about it the day after. And so it was definitely a time of extremely reckless decisions and extremely silly situations that I got myself into. But at the same time, it was truly the first breath of absolute freedom in a sense. But it also, and that's the part that people that called it a great experience usually didn't get, was also a time of loneliness and of, how would you say, feeling lost and feeling extremely self-reliant, but in a way that a 16-year-old shouldn't be, if it makes sense. I can tell you more about that if that fits the podcast.
I think it is just important to know that there's always two sides to it. So even though you say you grow so much through the situations, there's also those sides where, even especially because you were 16 years old, right? I was 19 when I went abroad for the first time, so completely different story. I mean, 3 years doesn't sound much, but between 16 and 19 there's a huge difference. So I'm sure you've also struggled with situations where you weren't sure where
what
you,
to do, who to trust.
Exactly. But that also, like, out of these situations, that's the only time where you really learn something, right? And like for your future situations, or even now living in Denmark, I'm sure a lot of things that happen to you in Argentina, you're able to use during your time here, like
Absolutely.
how to get to know people, and that's how you personally grow as well. And that's a very important aspect that we talk about in this podcast continuously as well, is that you personally grow through these experiences. And of course, a lot of them are very, very great, but there's always also a bad side to it. So
Indeed.
Exactly. But I think we can create the bridge here and maybe talk about Denmark and your experience in Denmark. So first of all, why did you choose to study in Denmark? So you said you've been abroad, but why Denmark?
This is, I believe, the question that most international students dread to some extent, because I always feel that there's obviously a combination of factors and a combination of decisions that bring you to Denmark or any other specific country that you decide to go live to. In my case, I would say it was a three-sided decision. So first of all, as I mentioned, I didn't go straight to university after high school, which in Italy is very uncommon. Instead, I decided to work in hospitality, and definitely during that time of day, I felt like I could create a career for myself in that sector. I also realized that there was just a lot I didn't know, and that I probably didn't realize because of my 18-year-old conviction that I already knew everything there was to know. Then secondly, when I realized this, I also realized that I wasn't so opposed to the idea of going to university anymore, but I still knew that I wouldn't be a good fit for Italian university, as it is quite theory-based, it's very hierarchical, and I just felt like, based on my friends' retellings of their experiences, it wouldn't be for me. So with those two decisions combined, in a sense, also came the decision of trying to look for universities abroad, and I kind of had a little list of parameters that I had to fit into, and one of them was the ability to support myself during my studies, as I didn't want for my parents to be the ones supporting me. So
we're talking about financial support for the listeners to understand, right?
Yes. Exactly. So substantially, yes, the ability to pay for my own expenses and the ability to pay for my own university, if case may be. And so, in a sense, that kind of closed the circle around Sweden and Denmark, and I got into Denmark, and as did you.
Nice. Could you go a bit into why you think it's financially able, or financially a good idea to study in Denmark? Because, I mean, if you think about Denmark, you always think about, oh, it's so expensive, and there's for sure some people listening here who have done, a vacation in Denmark, and they're like, oh my God, this is so expensive. Like,
yes.
How can you even live there? So could you elaborate a bit on, the financial situation, and how do you finance your studies in Denmark?
Sure. So students who are European citizens have the right to study at Danish universities for free, because the Danish universities are free for Danish citizens, and because of European laws, European citizens cannot be discriminated out of this availability. Mm-hmm. So if you hold a European passport, you have access to free education in Denmark. So first of all, that's a big improvement in respect to other countries, for instance Italy, where university taxes can be really high and really demanding. Mm-hmm. Also, and this is sort of the key to attracting a lot of international students, is that because of those same European laws, international students, which is kind of the term that we use in general for students who are not from Denmark, so European students, can access something called SU, which is a study grant granted by the Danish government to all Danish citizens, but also to European citizens who qualify at the same time as students and migrant workers. To do so, you would have to work for a minimum of 42 hours every month, but for a Danish employer that is obviously paying taxes for you. And in that way, you are granted something called equal status. So you would get a very similar amount to what your Danish peers would get in your same situation.
Yeah, very interesting that you're mentioning this. For those German listeners listening in or tuning in, it's very similar to what we know as BAföG in Germany. And but what is also important here to mention is that SU you don't need to pay back. So once you're granted SU and you receive it from the Danish government, but it is dependent on having a job, as you just mentioned also, Livia. You don't need to pay it back at some point. So this grant is for free, and as a EU citizen, you can receive this grant. Mm-hmm. But maybe we should mention as well that sometimes it's not so easy, as it sounds, very...
it's very
nice.
Enticing.
Exactly.
Yes.
It's not that easy to find a job. So a lot of people would, do dishwashing jobs, or, distributing newspapers or stuff like that, or working in supermarkets.
Yes, I've done 2 out of 3 things. So if you want, I can elaborate a little bit of that. Yeah. So as I said, the possibility of accessing SU is definitely one of the main selling points of international students looking at Denmark. Mm-hmm. It's important to say that although Denmark has one of the highest proficiencies in English in Europe, outside of English-speaking countries, it is still very much of a setback not to be able to speak the local language, so not to be able to speak Danish, and that in some way, in multiple ways actually, sets you back compared to your Danish peers, because all jobs that are, for instance, service related, so think about hotel clerks or waiters and waitresses or baristas, obviously you are required to be able to communicate to at least some extent with Danish-speaking customers. So perhaps the jobs that would be most readily available for students in their home countries are not as readily available in Denmark. And as I mentioned, I had a pretty good taste of that myself. I think I was very confident when I came to Denmark that I could apply my experience in the hotel industry. That did not happen. I took the city by storm with my resumes, but unfortunately none of the hotels in town ever contacted me back. And so I ended up first delivering newspapers. Then I was part of the cleaning staff at my own university. I delivered pizzas. I was a waitress in an Italian restaurant. I cleaned dishes in a sushi restaurant. And lately, I've been a student instructor for my university, which has definitely been the best possible job opportunity I got in my time in Denmark.
Yeah, especially because it also is good for your CV.
Indeed.
Yeah, but basically, long story short, it is possible to find a job in Denmark as a student and as an international, but it's not as easy as you might think. So if you're considering, trying to find a job or, considering going to Denmark, try to look for jobs even before you come here to be able to apply for SU. But it is possible, and I myself also had a job during the time that I told you about in a previous podcast episode. So it is possible, but be aware to look out for it in time.
And one thing I might add is think about the possibility of not getting a job in the first semester, so in the first 6 to 8 months of your time in Denmark, because you might be able to get a job. So for instance, I had the newspaper delivery job, but that would not count for enough hours for SEO. So there is a possibility that it might take you some time to build that social circle and that social standing that then could help you get into a more stable and more valuable job.
Perfect. Sounds good. So now that we're still talking about Denmark, maybe you could tell me a bit about your opinion on studying in Denmark, and what do you like or dislike?
I would say that I normally say that I have a rather complicated relationship with Denmark. There are certain things that I obsess with, that I love so much, and there are things that still rub me the wrong way after 3 years here. So about education, I would say I love the almost absence of hierarchy. It was definitely a big change from coming from Italian high school to be able to call your professor by first name, to be able to approach them. Exactly. I definitely, the first few times I definitely called them like Professor Erica or Professor Mess, because I just wasn't comfortable with being like, hey, you.
Hi, you. What's up?
Indeed. And other than that, I definitely remember one of my first impressions was just how modern the university looked and how delighted I was that everything worked. So for those listening from countries with relatively low rates of computerization like Italy, in Danish universities, you're kind of expected to walk in with your laptop and you have a power plug that works at every single desk and everything works all the time and it's great. Other than that, I think when it comes to education, I almost only have positive remarks about Denmark. I think that the recognition comes when you face social interaction and, as we talked about, the access to the job market. So in a sense, it's something common that I've realized a lot of international students feel, that you're very welcome by your educational institution, and then you find more of a harder wall to breach in society at large.
Could you elaborate a bit on that? So you're talking about the Danish society and the Danes itself, so it's hard to socialize with them and to get to know them?
No, everybody who's studying in Denmark for a certain amount of time will give you a different answer. But what I perceived, I would say I went through different phases of realization. So my first realization was that Denmark has a culture, which might sound silly to say, but I definitely did not expect it to be as different from Italian culture given the proximity. But it is different, and particularly is different in the assumptions that you can make about your relation to a person based on your interactions. And let me give you an example. So during my first week at university, we had a freshman party. So all of my new classmates and I joined at a pub. And there was this one classmate who's talked with me for most of the night. So we buddied up pretty well. And this was on a Saturday night. And then Monday morning, when class came, I waved to this person to like sit next to me, and they just looked at me like I had just grown a second head, and just did not wave back, did not say hi, and just scurried to another seat. Now obviously that sounds odd at best, but particularly for Italians, where refusing to say hi to somebody means that you kind of have beef with them. I was like, oh my god, what have I what did I do? What have I done? Did I say something stupid? So it was definitely a moment of complete cultural confusion. And then confronting this story with those of other students and of Danes, in the end, I just came to the realization that was normal, that the time spent and the socialization done during what I would call drinking time, quote unquote, does not necessarily apply to the rest of the time or the rest of the week. So I think maybe one of the things that I mentioned that still kind of rubbed me the wrong way, or that I don't feel like I could incorporate in my own sociability or social skills, is this disconnect between what happens in a drinking situation and what happens in a non-drinking situation.
Yeah, it's definitely also an experience I made, is that it's very hard to get close to Danes, but as soon as you do, then you're in the circle and, you know, you're part of it. And just because you have had fun at a party doesn't mean you're close friends. So that's also something that Danes really like to do. They really like to drink and have parties, because that's when they open up.
Exactly.
But they're more, you know, closed up in normal situations. So it does take a bit of time. But as I said, like as soon as they do open up, you're part of the group and you have a friend for a lifetime. And I think that's quite similar to actually the German culture. So it's definitely different to Italians, but more closer to the German culture, as we do experience that as well in the German market, I'd say. But yeah, very interesting. And so that's basically, I think, something you would dislike. But is there something besides the educational system that you really like in Denmark?
To the risk of sounding repetitive, I like how everything works. And again, someone who has experienced life in Italy would understand. So, for instance, one of my earliest shocks was realizing that you have Wi-Fi on the bus and you have Wi-Fi on the train. And for instance, just how easy it is to travel around, not just your city, but the entirety of Denmark, by using a couple of mobile apps and a single travel card. How easy and speedy it was to deal with bureaucracy, or well, how little bureaucracy there was. So it definitely, to the extent of dealing with quote unquote things, it definitely feels like moving to the future, or at least to a good 30 years into the future with me.
Nice. So is there anything else you would add to that in terms of differences between Italy and Denmark, and biggest differences? Maybe something you miss the most in Italy? Probably food, I guess.
I did miss the food, but luckily I've learned how to cook most of the things that I miss, so that was pretty good. I think I missed the most, the potential for building social relations. I feel like in the amount of time that I've known some of, for instance, my Danish classmates at university, I would have made very close friends with similar people if I had spent enough time with them in Italy. So definitely it can be frustrating, as we said, trying to get close to Danes, as you tend to have to bring all of the interest, or sort of it has to come from you, and it will most likely not come from them, the input. So that definitely there was a difference. And I would say the other thing is mutual help and support in society. Again, I have sort of I have just some examples that have happened to me. So, for instance, I once went to buy a certain amount of plywood from a shop in town, and I got this plywood cut into pieces, and then the person that was helping me just kind of left me there with what I would say were the equivalent of about, I don't know, 15 kilos of plywood. So while I was kind of dragging all this to the counter through the shop, I dropped it. And at least I would say 3 people walked by me while I was scrambling on the floor to pick it up, and no one offered help. To which my Italian brain reacted to as, these people don't care, these people don't want to help each other. I then brought it up with some Danish friends, and they said, well, they probably thought you got it, you had it, you were able to handle it. But I definitely realized that wouldn't have happened in Italy, maybe because of sexism, or maybe just because we're more ready to lend a hand if you're in need.
Yeah, and that's a discussion I actually had with a lot of friends before, like this difference between individualistic and collectivistic countries. So those countries where, your personal, basically space and everything that you do is more based on your own kind of growth and everything you do. And in comparison to collectivistic countries where it's more about the group and group efforts and stuff like that. So coming from a probably more collectivistic country into an individualistic country can be tough at times with this, right? And I also heard from, even intercultural relationships where there's like a Dane with an international, that it's very common here that Danes expect that you want to be able to do your own, or you're, strong enough to do it on your own. And that's the kind of, way of thinking here. So that's why they probably don't even want to be rude. They just don't want to make you feel like you're inferior or something. And that's why they don't end up helping you. But of course, like coming from a different culture, that would be perceived as super rude,
exactly.
right?
It reads in a different way.
Exactly. But super interesting, and that's exactly what we talk about when we talk about culture clashes and, coming from a different country where you're used to different habits and,
I also think it's important for people that have had previous international experiences and are what some would say cosmopolitan, to admit and retell the stories of their culture clashes, because we tend to associate them with someone at their first experience abroad, or maybe someone who's, maybe not very well versed with languages. And that's really not the case. You're never prepared, or you can never prepare enough to avoid all and every culture clash. And when they will happen, you will have a really hard time wrapping your brain around it, because a certain behavior, so for instance the helping someone who seems to be scrambling, is understood as completely normal and accepted and almost expected in Italy, and the absence of that is understood as incredible rudeness, whereas when that same situation is seen from a Danish person then it just swaps the other way around.
Exactly. So interesting to see, right? And that makes also and creates the best stories, right? Because those are the things that you end up talking about with your friends and, kind of joking about afterwards. So that's a very cool part as well. So I guess it's time to move to the next section. So let's talk about a bit, what does traveling and living abroad mean to you personally?
I would say those are two different things in a sense, because I feel like obviously thanks to increasing wealth in general of a lot of population in Europe, it has become more and more common for a lot of people from different backgrounds to travel abroad. So I don't know if it still holds as much change potential, if you want to call it that, as it used to, as I think it's now possible to go visit any European capital and obviously find similar facilities. You will always have a Starbucks, you will always have McDonald's, and in a sense, at least in European terms, I would say that abroad has become very much closer to home than we used to think. But living abroad, I would say it's a whole different game, because it requires a much longer commitment from you, and quite a lot more effort, since especially if you're planning on living somewhere for an extended period of time, you have to figure out your visa, you have to figure out how to maintain yourself economically, and once you've figured out all of those things, it's time to figure out your social life, because you can be alone in a new country for long. So what do you do then? Do you go to your to the international community? Do you look for people from your own country? And I would also have to say that the older I get, the more it seems odd to try and go look for people. As we know, it's easier to make friends when you're a child, and people just kind of congregate together. And as an adult, it's a little more odd to try and get to know somebody. But it's still very much worth it. And depending and if you put your goodwill in it, you will find people anywhere that.
And relating to this making friends abroad, as you just mentioned, is there anything you can recommend to our listeners on how to make friends abroad?
Personally, I've never thought of myself as a particularly socially apt person. But a mistake that I think I did a lot in previous experiences abroad was to consider my time abroad as a fresh start, as in to be able to leave the things that I didn't like about me or that I didn't feel comfortable with back in my home country, and then be able to project or become a different person to some extent in the new country. Obviously, your demons know how to swim, and they know how to fly as well. So to the best of my abilities, I would recommend to be yourself. And if yourself is maybe a little shy or a little socially awkward in your home country, you can be exactly that in your host country. And it might take a little longer indeed, but you will find your particular taste of weirdo.
Especially because everyone is in that situation, especially for those who are also internationals coming to that country abroad, also wanting to make friends, also being in the same situation. So everyone can relate much better to each other. So it's much easier to make friends, also, as you said before, even in Denmark, with internationals instead of with locals. But if you put in the effort and keep trying, then you're able to make it with locals too. Good point. And so my next question would be, do you think you have personally grown due to your experiences abroad, and how?
Absolutely. I don't know if I would say I've grown in personality, but I've definitely become more open than I would have ever been if I had stayed sort of in my hometown or in my home country. And perhaps the biggest change that I can trace back to my experiences abroad is just this realization that there are multitudes of ways of living your life, and what is almost revolutionary in your tiny sort of societal pond back in your hometown fits perfectly somewhere else. So again, I started perhaps traveling as a way to escape, but I've discovered that it's also a way to finding yourself and finding your standing and finding your place in the world.
Super cool answer. So I guess it's time to wrap it up with some recommendations for our listeners. So what is the one thing you hadn't known before you went abroad, and what you want to share with our listeners today?
I would say out of all my experiences, maybe two things. So one, don't if you can, avoid putting extreme pressure on yourself when you decide to go abroad. Try not to get influenced by, for instance, what your peers are achieving at the same time in your home country. In the moment that you take a decision such as going abroad, you set yourself on a very different path. So for instance, for me, while I was studying in Denmark, all of my friends graduated from university, and obviously that was a time of reflection and whether or not, and I didn't know if I was falling behind, but in actuality, you can't fall behind if you're not running the same race. And the second recommendation would be try to set yourself some boundaries, and try to realize who you are now in respect to your family and immediate friends. This is something that I actually had to talk about quite a lot with my parents, because obviously they want to know that you're safe, they want to know you're okay. But a lot of times, if you talk to them, for instance, every day or multiple times a day, it might be that you're giving them contradictory messages or information, because obviously your mood changes during the day and during the week. So in order both for you not to worry them and for them to be able to process your distance in kind of a better way, perhaps say that you will talk every 3 days or once a week, or however long it takes for you to be able to detach a little bit from that safety net, and to be able to experience the sense of loss in a sense, but also of discovery of what you can actually do on your own, because you can do so much more than you think you're capable of.
That is so well said. Thank you for that, and such an important insight, right? Because it's not going to be the same experience if you just constantly, are in you should be in contact with family and friends from home, but you also should realize that that's the one-time experience where you are abroad, and where you should also be in the moment and not live mentally at home and be
exactly. And sort of also do not live vicariously through your social interactions back home, because not only you might be missing up on something that is happening right then and there, but it will also inevitably hold you back emotionally and psychologically, and you will not be as ready for what's coming as you would be if you were.
Exactly. So basically, letting the FOMO at home.
Indeed.
Exactly. And lastly, so do you have any advice you would give to our listeners who want to go abroad?
So if you know that you want to go abroad, then you have already so much more information about what you want to do than I did back then. So congratulations, you already have a clue about what you want to do. I'd say you do your research, and do not get discouraged if you feel like nobody has done it before, or if you can't find help or support around you. For maybe the only time I will ever say it in my life, trust the internet. It is definitely possible to do this on your own, to organize this on your own. I realize it takes time. I know it takes energy, but it's a possibility, and if anything, you should give it a shot.
Exactly, because it's totally worth it in the end.
Absolutely.
Well, then let's wrap up. Thank you for being here today with me.
Thank you for having me.
And it was very nice and insightful. So I'm very excited for the feedback of our listeners, and have a good time in Copenhagen.
Maybe
you. See you around there.
I'll let you know. Thanks again.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening today. It means a lot to me that you made it all the way to the end. If you love this podcast, then please hit the subscribe button and give me a rating or review on Apple Podcast. Only with your help, this podcast will be shown to other like-minded people who want to learn how to go abroad too. I appreciate your help and I'm looking forward to seeing you in 2 weeks again. Bye bye.
Tschüss, bis zum nächsten Mal.
Mange tak. Vi ses.
Naslyšenou. Ensi kertaan.
Alla prossima.
谢谢，再见。